Joining me to discuss the latest royal bombshells dropped from California overnight, former Royal Press Secretary in front of the show, Dickie Arbiter, Royal Commentator Emily Andrews, and from LA Live, our favourite, Kinsey Schofield, morning, evening, whatever it is, all. Let's start with you, please, Emily. Because it's still in my mind. I sat there and I was like, wow. I'm going to I'll tell you what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with my 32-year-old daughter, Harriet, who I think sums up what a lot of people would think. Dad, this whole thing, I think it's taken too far now. I got Netflix, but this is just slagging your family off on national television. No one does that. I mean, some things need to be kept in the family. I mean, now I think he's lost the plot, Dad.
And I think Harriet, isn't it? I think Harriet's view will be echoed across, you know, much of the UK today. I think it's really difficult for people to, yes, on the one hand, great to hear Prince Harry. And I thought, actually, for the most part, the first 20 minutes last night was incredibly emotional. I mean, listening to him read his autobiography in his own voice.
Sounded like Gordon Ramsay, though. Can I just say the voiceover, I thought?
Let me finish. OK. It was very emotional hearing him talk about how Charles had come to tell him that his mummy had died and that he didn't quite believe it and he thought he'd still see her that evening. And that, I mean, that was... I've already read the book, but we've seen the extracts. Obviously, it's been leaked. And I felt very emotional, actually. I had a tear, a cynical old hack like me. I thought he came across incredibly well. I think the problem is, though, as Harriet said, you get to the latter half of the interview and he is inconsistent, he is illogical, and ultimately you cannot escape the fact that he is airing far too much public laundry. At one point he says, oh, I would like to reconcile with my brother and my father, but I'm not going to tell you, Tom, what I'm going to say to them because that's private and it should stay private.
Let's start with that racial chat. I mean, in the Oprah interview, Dickie, and Emily's exactly right, it just... You looked at it, you felt sympathy, and then you just got to the point where you thought, this is inconsistent again. They made these racist claims against the royal family. Backtracked last night. What does that say?
Well, it says that he doesn't actually know what he's talking about. And what is quite interesting is that he's coming up with all this private stuff, and yet he's the first one, with Meghan, who left the country because they wanted some form of privacy. They didn't want their lives analysed by the British media. And it's not just the British media, although he was making a big point of attacking the British media, but it's global media. It's not just the guys here. It's not like people like Emily. It's global. And he was attacking them, and you just do not air your dirty washing in public. If you've got a problem, you discuss it with the family. It's no good saying that, well, they've got to open the door, they've got to apologise, they've got to let us in. He's the one that left. He's the one that's writing. He's the one that was on Netflix for 6 hours, and he's the one that was in Oprah.
And that's my point. If you want reconciliation, if you go and do what he's doing, he's putting them in a completely impossible position. You're kicking the opportunity to make peace down the road, aren't you?
Totally, and I think he is totally deluded, actually, if he thinks that by taking this course of action, it's going to encourage William and Charles to come back to the discussion table. I mean, the book, the press junkets that he's doing to promote the book, for me, are a massive cry for help / cry for attention.
But you see now, so Holly, who works on the show, right, sent a text saying, in the first 20 minutes, I feel really sorry for this kid. I think he's unstable. I shot back 40 minutes later going, unstable, yes, at that point, but stable enough to cut a deal with Spotify when he lands in America and stable enough to sit. And by the way, he looked completely primed and produced. It's as if he had 6 lines ready to give out, right?
He's well rehearsed. He's learnt the script. He's learnt the mannerisms with his hands because he's not that sort of person. He's not the brightest bunny on the planet. But he's learnt the script and he's well rehearsed because there's no question that that wasn't rehearsed.
Let's go across to LA. Good friend of the show, Kinsey Schofield. Thank you for joining us. We were talking about global media. We've talked over the last couple of weeks with you about how, you know, this was really aimed at the American audience. We saw the Anderson Cooper interview as well. 64% of the British public in a poll today say we can't have him. What's happening in America? What's their gut feeling after these two unbelievable interviews went out yesterday?
Well, I will tell you, and I know everybody's seen both interviews by now, it did feel like there was a shift in his tone when he spoke to Anderson Cooper. I mean, he calls the royal family racist again. in the Anderson Cooper interview when he says that the reason that they didn't get along with Meghan was because she was black and biracial. I mean, is that not racism? But over on ITV, he says, oh, no, they're not racist. So it does feel like they're still perpetuating that narrative over here. And the very first interview I did over here, which was with CBS Los Angeles, they said, so are the royal family racist? Is there bigotry in the royal family? And I said, no, Harry says it's unconscious bias. And they said, well, isn't that a nice way of saying racist? So he is continuing this racist narrative, and it is global. And I mean, I do think he's a liability to the royal family at this point in time.
Can I ask you the difference, Em? Seriously. Racism... Dickie and I were talking about this in the green, we ain't got a clue. Racism and unconscious bias.
Well, of course, I'm going to answer your question, Jacob,
Yep.
but I thought Kinsey made a really good point. The difference between the UK interview and the American interview with Anderson Cooper. I wondered whether he had tailored his answers slightly differently. In the UK last night, he told Tom Bradby that Bradby says, you're scathing about your stepmother, Camilla. And Harry goes, no, I'm not. I mean, I've read the book. Yes, he is. But in America, in the American interview with Anderson Cooper, he calls Camilla the villain. The third person in the marriage. She was leaking stories. The villain, because she wanted to be queen, there would be people or bodies on the street on her way to this ultimate crown that she so prized. And I was like, whoa, this is completely different, the two things. Had he prepared different lines for the UK interview and the UK audience?
We're going to talk more. We're going to talk more about the Camilla thing.
Racism,
unconscious bias. Help two old people out.
Well, I mean, look, I don't feel particularly well qualified.
What do you mean old?
Well, we are, Dick. Come on.
Darling, I'm much younger than both of you put together.
We could be her fathers, couldn't we, really?
And I'd be delighted to have
here we
it.
go.
No, as I understand it, and I feel slightly
Grandfather
unqualified.
in my case.
I feel slightly unqualified because I always feel slightly awkward talking about race as a white person. And in fact, there's a very famous book, Why I Won't Talk to White People About Race Anymore. But the difference is to be racist is to make obviously offensive comments about the colour of someone's skin or their ethnic background, knowing that it's going to be racist, knowing that it's going to be hugely offensive. Unconscious bias is when you just don't realise. So, for instance, and I've mentioned this already on your show, JK, for instance, and I agree with Harry, there is unconscious bias at the palace. There are those Blackamoor statues in Windsor Castle, in Buckingham Palace. Those statues, that 19th, very late 19th century, 20th century art movement of black figures holding up lamps or tables, and as you know, they're based on black slaves, and that to me is unconscious bias. That the Queen didn't see it, that Charles doesn't see it. They're in Burke Hall. He doesn't see that, and he doesn't recognise that. That's really, really offensive. I find that offensive.
I agree. I agree with you. It's just how he then addresses the whole thing. Bringing Kinsey back in. Kinsey, I said 64% of the public in this poll today in the United Kingdom have a negative view of Harry after this interview and Meghan. Support in the US, is it ebbing away? Is it solidifying? Do they see the royals as racist, or are they turning against this pair? Because that was the dream, wasn't it? The American market.
Well, I do think that that support is waning, but I also think that Americans love the idea of the racist narrative. And Emily is absolutely right. He did cater to our audience because that is such a touchy, polarizing subject that obviously you are going to feel guilty if you do not side with him, because if you don't side with him, then you're a racist. And so I do think that he still has support here in the United States. It's waning. People are tired of hearing about him complain. Jeremy, we've got inflation, a recession on the horizon. We don't care about titles and tiaras.
I completely agree. Dickie, any evidence in what you saw last night that there can be any reconciliation between him and Harold and Willie? I mean, the story of him going round and the dog bowl. Can I just do this? I did it on Thursday if you didn't watch the show. Dickie Arbiter will tell you that it is a known fact that dog bowls in the royal household, I could back this up with them, are made of?
Metal.
Metal. Very difficult for one to crush and put bits in your back. Can you see? Because he paints a pretty poor picture of the next King of England. He says he's the red mist, he's got a temper. It gives the impression that William's all about doing it the right way, irrespective of emotion, irrespective of what's right and wrong, and that they were jealous, essentially, of the impact that he and Meghan were having.
Well, let's put it this way. First of all, temper. Yeah, there is the famous Windsor temper. I've seen the King's spiral go into orbit. I've seen the Queen go into orbit as well. And Haven't yet seen Harry, but I'm sure he's done it, given
I have.
everything
Have you?
you have. Yeah. So they all go into orbit.